Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man tabi'a nahjahum ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. Inshallah, we are going to proceed with our discussion related to the Mustalah al-Hadith, that is the Hadith Terminology. So if you can recall, we were discussing about the classification of the narrations. We talked about the al-mutawatir and we talked about al-ahad, and we had discussed about the classification of the al-ahad, of which we are discussing in the subsegment of al-ahad. That is, we discussed about the viral narrations. We talked that is the viral narration. We talked about that is the one that is not viral, meaning polymorphic narration and unimorphic narration, of which we discussed that as for the al-ahad, hadith al-ahad is also subdivided into two categories. One of the category is based upon the pathways of its arrival, that is the pathway of the narration, and the second classification is based on merit. And we discussed that based on the pathway of its arrival, based on how it comes, the pathway, the ways, the channels of the narration, you can subcategorize it into three categories, of which it is known as one of the recognized classification of the al-ahad based on the pathways or based on the channel. That is, we have al-mashhur, we have al-garib, we have al-aziz. These are the classification based on that is the channels of the narration. That is for the al-ahad. Al-ahad can be categorized into two. One of the category is based on the rutbah, and one is based on the turki naqlihi ilayna. So the one that we discussed previously is based on the channels, based on the tariq or turki naqlihi ilayna, and it is subcategorized into al-mashhur, al-aziz, and al-garib. So al-mashhur is the one that is popular, a popular narration. So based on the channel, you would be able to understand that this narration, based on the pathway, it is a popular narration, as I discussed in the previous session. And likewise also, if is a kind of famous, that is al-aziz, and we discuss about also al-garib, unfamiliar. So the differences is that the one that is popular is the one that the narrators or the reporters are from 3 to above, maybe 3 or more than more reporters. If they report such narration, so that narration is termed as al-mashhur, that is the popular narration. And the one that is famous is the one that 2 individuals narrated that, and the one that is narrated by a single person, it is known as al-garib, that is the unfamiliar or peculiar narration. So we are going to discuss based upon a rutbah, based on the merit. So al-ahad can be also subclassified into 5 classes, that is based on merit, based on the position, based on its authenticity, or based on the merit, a rutbah, based on the position, of which you can classify it into 5 classes. One of the class is as-sahih li-ghayrihi, and there is as-sahih that is sahih li-ghayrihi and sahih li-zatihi. So the first class is sahih li-zatihi, the one that is authentic in its nature, normally in its normality is authentic, and the one that is authentic due to another narration, sahih li-ghayrihi, due to other. And there is hasanul li-ghayrihi, the satisfactory one, and hasanul li-zatihi, the one that is satisfactory based upon that is its normality. And there is also ad-da'if. So these are the classes. One of the class sahih li-zatihi, صحيح لغيره, حسن لذاته, حسن لغيره, and also the ضعيف, that is a flimsy one, that is a weak one, a weak narration. So these are the classification of al-ahad based upon the merit, of which this kind of classification can also be applied to that is al-mutawatir. As I keep mentioning, that every mutawatir can be authentic, but it is not all the authentic hadiths that are mutawatira. So likewise, we are going to start with the discussion about صحيح لذاته, صحيح لغيره, حسن لذاته, حسن لغيره, and الضعيف. This is our point of discussion. So Uthaymin rahimahullah mentioned that فالصحيح لذاته, فالصحيح لذاته, the one that is authentic in its nature, that is the first class. ما رواه عدل تام الضبط, is the one that a competent person narrated, a competent individual narrated that تام الضبط, تام الضبط, the one that is having complete refutations. So if a person narrated an incident, or he narrated a narration, a riwayah, he narrated hadith, if that particular person is a competent person and he has all the reputations, he has, that is the reputation of the righteous, he is a righteous person. Righteousness is part of the that is those kind of reputations. Also his iman, we'll get to discuss about this. So ما رواه عدل تام الضبط is the one that a kind of competent person narrated. So if a person is competent, he is deserved to be having an authentic narration. But competency doesn't solve the issue. When you the most competent person on the globe or on the earth, it doesn't mean that everything that you narrated is right, or it can be accepted, or it can be considered. There are other factors to be considered. We have to evaluate you, even if you are competent. For example, you have the certification, you have the license and everything. Yes, you are competent, but there are other issues in some of the circumstances that can be required, like your reputations. A person can be a competent person, but he lacks some of the reputations. The reputations can be basically like that is like, for example, where do you come from, your background, for example, your place, for example, your age, for example, because age matters. Maybe when that incident happened, you were not alive, for example, or you were not there, or you are not that is you weren't in that particular place also. So all these are some of the reputations, and also that is your locality. So these are some of the issues that are related to that is the reputations. So there are many things to be considered, of which we will discuss about this, that is in some of the coming sessions, inshallah. So if we are talking about an authentic narration, it's a kind of narration whereby a competent person narrated that, and that particular person shall be a person with full reputations. He shall have reputation. So ما رواه عدل ضابط, ما رواه عدل تام الضبط is the one that a competent person narrated, تام الضبط, with a complete reputations. So there is a difference between عدل ضابط and عدل تام الضبط, and that's why you would see some of the riwayah, some of the hadiths are classified as al-hasan لغيره. You would see there would be a kind of thiqah, or عدل أو عدل ضابط in the jarh والتعديل, in the ta'dil, in his ta'dil, in his accreditation. But his hadith can be in a kind of position not to the level of صحيح لذاته. So صحيح لذاته is the one that a competent person narrated, تام الضبط, the one that is having complete repetition بسند متصل with a kind of linked reference, a kind of connected reference, not a kind of defective one, not a kind of a reference that has no linkage. So the link is not linked reference, meaning when he says that, when he narrated, I heard from fulan min fulanin an fulanin an fulanin or an ilanin wallah musta'an. So that particular person that he referred to, he shall listen from him. It should be confirmed, it should be verified that yes indeed that his reference is a confirmed reference. Otherwise it would be termed as a weakness, because by that he would be evaluated whether he is a liar or not. These are some of the issues to be evaluated in terms of classifying, that is the hadith, in terms of the taxonomy, for example. So these are some of the issues that we should know. There is a kind of narration when that journalist, for example, narrated that, you have, before you react, for example, before you take it, you have to know the competency of that channel, or the competency of that reporter or that journalist, and you have to also know his reputation. Allah understand. Having complete reputation, it doesn't mean that he will not make a mistake. For example, a mistake he can, because he is not malaika, but there are some of the mistakes that shall not be considered, and there are some of the mistakes that would be considered, and this is known, for example, in the public sector, for example, and also in the commercial sector or private sectors. When a public servant commit a particular error, a mistake, for example, so the ones that is maybe the CEO, or for example the ones at the top, they will look towards that particular mistake. If that mistake is a kind of mistake that he shall be forgiven, for example, they will look over it. But if that mistake is a kind of capabilities one, a kind of huge one, of which it will affect, that is their company or their industry, for example, or their work, he may end up having a kind of finality. They can even rusticate him, for example. So mistake has it has a kind of role to play in competency, but in terms of reputations, it doesn't mean, even if, for example, that particular person make a particular mistake, but there is a mistake that cannot be approved, for example, like a kind of betrayal. If that particular person is recognized that he is a betrayer, or he betrays someone, like what has happened, or what has happened between Imam al-Bukhari and one of the narrators. Imam al-Bukhari has narrated a lot of hadiths from that particular person. One day he went to learn some of the narration, some of the hadiths, to collect the information from him. So he discovered that that particular person, that particular alim, is trying to catch his animal, but he tricked the animal in the sense that he provided a kind of container, a food container, but there is no any food for that animal inside the container. The container was empty container. So when he pointed the container, the animal, the she camel, thought that there is a food. He is trying to give her food. He want to feed her. She thought that it is the feed. So when she came, he just catch that animal. So Imam al-Bukhari says, if this person would have a kind of confidence to deceive an animal, so it is easy for him to trick the humans. If that particular person, he has a kind of stratagem to trick animals, so it is easy also to trick humans. He can trick humans. Allah understand. So being a person, like for example, being him a smart person, there is a way where smartness doesn't work. So there are some of the factors that are to be considered in terms of evaluating the taxonomy or evaluating the narration. So even if the journalist, for example, or the narrator is a licensed person, he has the license, he has the qualifications, for example, he is a degree holder or anything. There is a kind of information that when he narrated, the editors will look over it. It doesn't mean that he is a qualified person that whatsoever he narrated can just be published, for example, or just shall be disseminated. They have to edit, for example. So, Wallah musta'an, they have to look over some of the points. So likewise, even in the field of hadith, these are the terminologies that have been utilized. وَسَلِمَ مِنَ الشُّذُوذِ وَالْإِلَّةِ الْقَاضِحَةِ. And that narration shall be free from conjecture, وَالْعِلَّةُ الْقَاضِحَةِ, and a diplomatic defect, or diplomatic, that is a hideous defect. It shall be away from a kind of indolence defect, for example. So this is the classification of صحيح لذاته, meaning ما رواه عدل تام الضبط, a kind of narration that the narrator is a competent person with full reputations, and that narration or that particular narrator shall be free from any conjecture or any hideous or indolence defect. Like for example, a lie, maybe he shall be considered if he is not a liar. We know there are some of the channels today, or some of the reporters, or some of the people in the social media, whatsoever they narrated is rumor. They spread the rumors, for example. They become rumongers, so you cannot just consider their narration. Even if they narrate something that is real, before you react, you have to cross-check. Allah understand. And there are some of the people, their contents are just for entertainment, for example. They just entertain people. You cannot just take a news, for example, or something to react from a comedian. If a person is a comedian, you cannot just take a riwayah from him. Maybe what he mentioned is just to entertain that is the humans, to entertain people or the gathering. So that shall not be just taken unless with thorough evaluations. So this is the classification of al-Sahih al-Lidhati. It's a kind of narration whereby the narrator shall be a competent person full of reputations, and he shall be free from any conjecture or any hideous or indolence defect. Indolence defect can be maybe al-kadhib, lie, or for example, or any kind of neurodegenerative disorder. We would get to discuss about this. Allah understand. If a person is dementiated or he has Alzheimer's disease, there is a kind of report that he will, even if he reported, even if he is the eyewitness, that his report shall not just be disseminated, to the public, for example, because he has a kind of disorder, a neurodegenerative disorder, for example. And also there are personality disorder or behavioral disorders that can be considered and the ones that can be rejected. So that's one of the issues. Allah musta'an. And we know there are some of the words that during their lifetime, in the beginning, maybe during their early age, when they are teenagers, for example, when they were teenagers, they have, that is, their IQ is full of capabilities. They don't have any neurodegenerative disorder, but at the end of their lifetime, you see they would get infected or they would get affected with such kind of disorders. So at that moment of time, whatsoever they narrated shall be overview, otherwise they would mention something which will become a mess to the community or to the public. Allah understand. I don't mean that an old journalist should be like, or an old alim shall not shall not issue ruling or something like that, or shall not report anything. No. If he has a disorder, a neurodegenerative disorder, his utterances, his sayings should be reviewed, for example. Or if that particular person is a 24 hours intoxicated person, so you shall not just react with whatsoever he says. You have to evaluate whether he is in that intoxication or not. This I'm talking in the real life scenarios. I'm not talking in the field of hadith, for example, because that is kabira or al-muharramat. So Allah understand is a kind of grievous defect. Allah understand in terms of riwayah or in terms of the adala of rawi. We'll get to discuss about these issues. So this is the first class. Sahihul lizatihi. Misalu, example of sahihul lizatihi. قوله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the statement of the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم, من يرد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. Whatsoever that the Almighty God intends him, whatsoever that the Almighty God wills him or he wants him with goodness, يفقهه في الدين, he will let him to learn in his religion. So the Rasul صلى الله عليه وسلم stated that whoever the Almighty desire goodness to that particular person, whoever the Almighty decided or the Almighty want him to be a good person, or he want goodness from him, he want him to be successful or to attain salvation, that particular person shall learn in his religion. Meaning the Almighty will provide all the resources to that particular person in order to learn in his religion. That particular person must understand his religion. So religion also matters. It doesn't mean, like for example, if a person is a free thinker, it doesn't mean that whatsoever he says is not in the interest of other people. Even if you are a free thinker, your words, your utterances can be politicals, for example, and at times your utterances can be free utterances. So likewise, if a person is a religious person, it doesn't mean that whatsoever he says is religious, or whatsoever he says is political. From whatsoever way you come, whether you come from the planet of apes, or you come from the Mars planet or Jupiter or Mercury, wherever you come, whatsoever you say or you say shall be evaluated. Whatsoever you report shall be evaluated. So there is need for evaluation, verifications, in order to disseminate information to the people. Otherwise there would be problems. So that's it. If you are a religious person, there are other factors to be considered. Your competency, your reputations, Allah al-Musta'an. So that's how it is. And likewise, this issue, I would give example like the narrations of Ka'ab al-Ahbar. You know what the ulama says about? It's not whatsoever narration that comes or that came from Ka'ab al-Ahbar that shall be considered. Some of his narrations, or some of the narrators narrated some of the narrations from him which are authentic. And some of his narrations, some of the first predecessors, they consider it as just Israeliyat, for example, fairy tales, for example. We get to discuss about these issues if we have enough time in the upcoming sessions. Allah understand. Just I'm giving a kind of example. So example of Sahihul Lizatihi, ma yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fi din. Whoever the Almighty deserve him with goodness, whosoever the Almighty want him to be successful, he will let him to learn the religion. He would be learned. And that's why you would see the first revelation that came to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, or that was revealed to the Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, is Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Iqra, study, learn, read. So if you want to be successful, you shall learn, you should study. For example, through this you would be able to be successful in this life and in the life of the hereafter. So this is one of the example of hadith where it is Sahihul Lizati. It is authentic to the highest level, and it is al-ahad. But which classification of al-ahad? We talked about that. So the classification of al-ahad is Rawah al-Bukhari wa Muslim, as how Usaymin mentioned. Imam al-Bukhari narrated this, and likewise Imam Muslim narrated this hadith. وتعرف صحة الحديث بأمور ثلاثة. You can know the authenticity of hadith by three factors. But before that, let's go back to the previous statement. He said رواه البخاري ومسلم. That hadith من يرد الله به خيرا يفقهه في الدين. Uthaymin mentioned that Imam al-Bukhari narrated the hadith, and likewise Imam Muslim narrated the hadith, meaning the hadith is authentic. Because next to the book of the Almighty are the Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, according to the saying of the righteous predecessors. There are some of the sayings of the righteous predecessors, like the saying of Imam Shafi'i, he considered Muwatta, for example. But if you read the saying of Imam Shafi'i took place before the publication of Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, because Imam Shafi'i came in the time of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, or prior to the time of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, although he was a teacher of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. But Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim and Imam Abi Dawud, they were students to Abu Abdullah Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. So one thing is that Imam Shafi was a student of Imam Malik. So in this regard, we will consider that Imam Shafi has mentioned that statement, that is before the publication of Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So but as for today, according to the general verification, according to the general attestation, that Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim are the basic authentic books after the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by this we would be able to understand that this hadith مَا يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. So like for example me saying, if I'm to say like this word or this terminology is mentioned in Oxford Advanced Learner Dictionary, for example. So whenever you had this reference that's from Advanced Learner, meaning it is a kind of English word, for example. It is a kind of authentic word, for example. So, but if I mention a kind of word and I said this is a kind of English word or it's a kind of Arabic word, but I did not give a reference, so I do not complete the task unless I give the reference. I can say, if I know the reference is from Latin word or Greek word, I can give that kind of reference, for example. So these are some of the issues that has to be reviewed in terms of the narrations. So here he said Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim narrated this hadith مَا يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. So based on this, we would consider this as authentic. And if we look based on the pathways, so it can be in which classification? It would be a famous classification. This hadith is a famous hadith. مَا يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. But it is not a viral one. How? Because this hadith, although, however, Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymin said Rawah al-Bukhari wa Muslim, but there are other narrators. Imam Tabarani reported this hadith. At least you would get 3 narrators to this hadith in at least 3 books of hadith. مَا يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. So if you look, this hadith is authentic. Sahihul لِذَاتِهِ. The reason is because the narration, the information came from basic authentic books of narration. So I think this point is clear. So also you can understand the authenticity of a narration, authenticity of hadith based on the following factors. Al-awwal, the first one, أن يكون في مصنف التزم فيه الصحة. For it to be from a kind of publication, a kind of proceeding or publication, التزم فيه الصحة, that maintains authenticity, that maintains validity. Suppose, for example, you take the information from, that is a published article. So that means that that information is an authentic one, it's a valid one, because it is published. it is published in a journal, for example. So if it is reviewed and it is discovered that it is a lie, it is a false or fairy tale, so the consequences of that would go to the company of that journal, or that journal company. Or you get the information from a particular newspaper, and the information is regards to be a false one. So that information shall be reviewed by that journal. Otherwise, the case shall be shifted to another level, maybe to the court, for example, or any other issues. And there would be penalties for that. So that's the reason, if you come across an information in a kind of published book, published proceedings, or published article, what it will tell you is that that particular narration, that particular information is an authentic one. And if then, most especially if it maintains validity, if it is a valid journal, like today, for example, if an information comes from the Cell or the Nature, for example, these are some of the popular journals, for example. And likewise, we have this hadith come from Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sahih Ibn Hibban. All this, you can consider it as authentic. So, but the issue is not that even if it is reported in a valid publication, that it can just be given. There are some of the issues to be considered also. Suppose like Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim, they have done all the works necessary to be done in order to confirm that this narration is authentic or not, because they have done all the works. But if you look to other narrators or to other publishers, they have some of the deficiencies in other ways of verification. Like today, due to the money, due to the competition, due to the challenges, they would just publish, they would just disseminate the information, for example, or due to a particular issue, or due to the kind of season or something like that. But that's why Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim, they have done all the necessary procedures, the necessary protocols to be taken in the verification. And that's why Ibn Muhaddis Muhammad Nasruddin al-Albani, when he reviewed Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, when he was asked whether to verify this hadith, he said that no, all the works we've been done, they have followed all the protocols. And that's the reason why, if you look, he doesn't talk about these issues in Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, because all the works were already done. And the kind of principles followed by Imam Bukhari, imagine a single hadith required a nafila in the Masjid al-Nabawi before he write, and even if he write, he has to do istikhara. He seek divine intervention in that. He did that, he did so. Beside the work they have done in verification of the chain of the transmission, the isnad and the matan, for example. And I gave example of one of the incident in the beginning of the session, the kind of narration that he rejected from one personality. So that's how the issues are. But even to the Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, there was a work done by one of the erudite person from the righteous predecessors, Imam al-Hakim al-Nisaburi. He wrote, or he published a book known as Al-Mustadrak al-Sahihayn, Al-Mustadrak al-Imam al-Hakim. Imam al-Hakim wrote a book, Al-Mustadrak al-Sahihayn, of which he reviewed Sahih al-Bukhari, he reviewed Sahih Muslim, and he considered that there are other authentic hadiths which were not reported by Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. And that's the reason, if you look towards their preface or acknowledgement, they have already mentioned that it is not all the hadiths of the Rasulullah that they reported. It is what come to them. It is what that is come apparent to them that it is authentic, that they confide. They said it is not all. Even Imam Muslim, he named the book Al-Musnad al-Sahih al-Mukhtasar. So likewise, by him also he said it's a kind of short summary, a reliable short summary. So that's how it is. Even if that particular journal or that book came from authentic publication company, they can miss some of the points. For example, in some of the issues, maybe they may bring the information in a kind of brief way. They would just brief the narration, the incident. And that's why you see, even in Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, you will see Imam Muslim narrated the hadith briefly, and Imam al-Bukhari narrated the hadith in detail. And you will see some of the narration narrated by Imam al-Bukhari, they are in detail. In other masanid or books of Sunan or Ma'ajim, the hadith is either in detail or in a brief format. So that's how it is. And likewise, even today, you would come across a particular statement from a particular news journal or news channel. One news channel will publish or would mention the information or the incident briefly. And one news channel would mention the information in detail. So these are some of the issues that you should know before making a quotation, before reacting to something, or before making a judgment on hadith, whether it is da'if or weak, or Allah al-Musta'an, whether this information is authentic or not. So these are some of the information that you shall review in order to understand that this narration is authentic or not. One of the factors أن يكون في مصنف التزم فيه الصحة shall be from a kind of publication that maintains validity إذا كان مصنفه ممن يعتمد قوله في التصحيح. If the publisher, the author, is a kind of person that maintains authenticity, is a kind of person ممن يعتمد قوله, whom his statement, his utterances, his sayings are to be referred, of whom his statements are reliable. كصحيحي البخاري ومسلم, like Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, as what I mentioned earlier. So one of the way to understand whether this narration or this hadith is authentic or not, that narration should come from a kind of publication of which that publication or that narration come from a kind of publication or proceedings or from a source that maintain validity. It shall come from a valid source. And we know in terms of mass communication or in journalism, how can you identify, how can you evaluate a valid source? How can you know, how can you differentiate whether this is valid or not? There are such protocols to be followed. So if a narration comes from a valid source, a kind of channel or a kind of reporter whom he maintains authenticity, or a kind of publication or publication company of whom they are known with valid publications, authentic publications. So in this regards, that can be considered as an authentic, or it came from a statement of a person that his statements are to be referred or are reliable, a person of reliable utterances, like Imam al-Bukhari or Imam Muslim, the persons or the people who provide valid information, authentic informations. Like today, in the management field or in the health issues or health sector, We have junior physicians, we have senior physicians, we have junior doctors, senior doctors. There are consultants. And likewise in the management, junior manager, senior manager, and the consultant, management consultants. And we have in other sectors, we have the CEOs. Allah al-Musta'an. Today, there are CEOs in different places, different sectors, everywhere. Even today, people are claiming that there are political CEOs. Here, if we are talking about issues of godfatherism and other issues, Allah al-Musta'an. So likewise in the field of da'wah, in the field of Allah al-Ta'alim, today also there are CEOs. Allah al-Musta'an. Having CEOs or godfathers, whatsoever you call it, it is not the problem. What is the problem is when there is deficiency, when there is indolence in the transmission or in the way. Allah musta'an. But if it is upon valid, upon that is authenticity, for example, there is no problem with that. If it is on the righteous way, without any bias, so having this kind of seniority or anything as such, it has no any problem. Allah musta'an. So with this factor, you will be able to know this is authentic or not. Suppose someone mentioned hadith. Simple way that you can verify it is authentic or not, take Sahih al-Bukhari, carry Sahih Muslim. If you find it there, it is authentic, definitely. If you did not find it, then there are other steps to be taken. Suppose you open, he said, مَا يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever God intends him with goodness, that particular person shall learn in his religion, would be a knowledgeable person. He would understand his religious perspective or perspectives. So Allah al-Musta'an, in these issues, the way to verify it is authentic or not, take Sahih al-Bukhari, take Sahih Muslim. If you check, you will see it is available, it is found in Sahih al-Bukhari, and likewise in Sahih Muslim. So directly, you would say it is authentic, because these are the verified authentic books of Ahadith. So suppose he mentioned another hadith which is not in Sahih al-Bukhari, like the hadith which says that al-azibu firashuhu min jahannam, for example. So definitely you will not get the hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, you will not get it in Sahih Muslim. So when you did not get it there, there are next steps, there are other steps, there are other ways to verify it is still a valid statement or not. So you have to go to the next step. أَيَّنُصَّ عَنْ صِحَّتِهِ إِمَامٌ يُؤْتَمَدُ قَوْلُهُ. Like a particular person, a kind of erudite cleric or scholar or research scholar mentioned that statement, that particular person is a reliable person. When he quoted that, maybe you had that quotation from one of the famous among the righteous predecessors. Maybe the hadith was reported from Imam al-Zuhri, or from Imam Waqi' ibn Jarrah, or Abi Hatim al-Razi, Abi Zur'at al-Razi, or from Musnad of Imam al-Shafi, Musnad Ahmad, Musnad Musnad Ibn Abi Shayba, Musannaf of Imam of Abdul Razzaq, or in the books of Ma'adim. Then you can consider that this is a valid information. So when an information is quoted, it comes from a kind of quotation of a scholar whom his statement is a reliable one, is among the nuqad. We know there are some of the nuqad of whom, if they say this is authentic or not, or whatsoever that came from them is authentic, they never say fairy tales, they never mention conjecture in their utterances. A typical example is Imam Daruqutni, a kind of person that has a merit of whom the ulama of his time were saying that any hadith that Imam Darqutni doesn't know, or he did not have a knowledge of that hadith, we consider that as da'if, as a weak, a flimsy narration. The kind of person that he is able to write with left hand and right hand, with right hand and left hand. He can write with right hand and he can write with left hand at a single moment. In a moment of time, he can write with the right hand and with left hand, and he can write different languages, 2 languages at the same time. You can dictate to him, 2 individuals can speak to him with different language. Like for example, the first person is dictating English to Imam Darqutni, and the second one is dictating Spanish or French, for example, or Italian, or Indian language, or Urdu, or Arabic. So at that moment, 2 individuals speaking to him with different languages, he would be able to write it with both the 2 hands. But today you would come, many people are right writers, and many people are left writers. Allah musta'an, left hand writers or right hand writers, and you would come across a person that can write with both hands. Recently I came across one woman. She was trying to teach her child the way to write with both hands, and this is one of the common or new way of teachings. Some of the schools now, they are teaching the children to be able to write with right hand and left hand. Allah understand, because in maintaining the daily task, when you are, like for example, when you become a teenager, there will be a moment that you may need to do 2 things at the same time. So if you have that kind of competency, or you have that kind of eligibility, then some of the issues would be easy for you. Wallah musta'an. So that was what was mentioned by Sheikh Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymeen regarding the second part. ولم يكن معروفا بالتساهل فيه. Meaning that أن ينص على صحته إمام يعتمد قوله في التصحيح ولم يكن معروفا بالتساهل فيه. Like a particular person quoted that narration, quoted that information, whom he is known in providing authentic contents, and he is never known with any kind of fairy tale, with any kind of weakness in terms of providing contents or information. So suppose you go, let me give this example in our common life scenario. You are in the social media, you followed someone, you followed a particular personality, and you know that that personality that you follow, or that alim that you follow, he provides authentic information always. So when he quoted something, you can consider it as a valid one, because normally that particular person, that particular celebrity, or that particular person, Allah musta'an, he is known with authentic or valid contents. He provides valid contents, so there is no problem with that. And likewise today, if you can mention the names of some of the ulama or some of the mashayikh, I can say fulan thiqa, fulan thiqatun thiqatun thiqa, fulan da'if, or such things, that what the past predecessor says, for example. But I would do it in a way that cannot violate the fast, for example. If I'm to do, I'm not saying that I will do it, but if it becomes necessary, and that's why you would see the ulama of this our time, they do that. They can refute a particular person, they can criticize whatsoever that come from so person, do not take it, or you can take it, there is no problem. He has some of the mistake, but you can take it, you can learn from him, or what he says, this fatwa of him is wrong, or something like that. So these are the issues to be considered. So when you have a particular personality that whatsoever he maintain authentic contents. He provide authentic content, or is a content creator. Whatsoever he published is authentic. So whenever he quotes something, you can just consider that. I think you get the point that I'm trying to discuss here. So that's the issue. So here, and he is not known with weakness, meaning he is a kind of person that is not lazy in providing the contents. Like even that is different righteous predecessors, they have different behaviors. Like Imam al-Amish, he was known with some of the behavior which is not pleasant to some of the students of knowledge. He has a dog in his house, as how it was reported by some of the historians, of whom if the student visited him, he would release the dog. So when he released the dogs, many of them would run, of whom some are saying he has a mad dog. So he would release the dog. So many of them would run and they will not come back. So the ones that remain, he would consider them as the ones that are dedicated for learning. They are committed to learning. So he would narrate the hadith for them. And at times it was mentioned that he used to beat his students. He used to give a kind of stroke to whosoever that is near to him as a student at that moment of time. That is Imam al-Amish. And other ulama, they have different behaviors. They have different methodology. So what here is that if a person maintains authentic contents, when he quoted something, you can just regard that as an authentic one. As you know, like today even, in the news channels, there are some of the news channels that when they publish something, you would just share it. You can just consider that. You can consider that as authentic information without any verification. And there are some of the news channels or some of the journalists of whom if they report something or they publish something in the social media handle, you need to verify because maybe it had happened that in one of the period of time they reported so many fairy tales, for example. So when they mention something, you would just verify before reacting to that. So these are some of the information in the field of hadith that are known by the ulama of hadith, by the tullab al-ilm. Allah al-musta'an. So that's the third factor. The third factor that you have to consider, or which you have to utilize, or which you have to follow when verifying this is authentic or not, this is valid or not. ينظر في رواته, to look into the narrators, who narrated that, from where it came, who narrated that, the personality of the reporter, who reported that, وطريقة تخريجهم, and the way the channels they followed in the report. How do they report the information? Like for today, do they report the incident with a camera? Do they capture, did the information come in an audio format or in a video format? Allah musta'an. Or it is from a newspaper, or it is from a magazine, newspaper, magazine, or a kind of information that comes from a journal or from a book, for example. So these are some of the statements. Like in science, when you go back to the second factor, the first factor, you have to check whether that statement came from authentic publication, or the publications that are known with authentic publications, or it came from a quotation of a person that provide valid contents or valid information, or for example it came from a kind of reports or reporters or news channels that maintain validity or authenticity. Like the second one, if I'm talking in the field of science, if something was mentioned Like when you quoted something, I asked you where do you source this, you said, or you provide a reference to one of the erudite scientists. Like for example, to say it is from Sir Isaac Newton, or for example, it came from Albert Einstein, for example. You see, he is a kind of competent scientist, and that is a renowned scientist, for example. So I can consider this a statement: this theory is valid or not, or this principle is a valid one or not. For example, like in the field of science, you can say that Fakhruddin Razi said. But in the field of theology, if you said Fakhruddin Razi said this, I need to verify, because we know his position from the righteous predecessors. Like today, if you said Charles Darwin mentioned this in the field of science, yes, I know he's a scientist, for example, so I know how to handle the issues. And likewise, this is the work that has been done, or that has been done by the editors or news editors. If a reporter or journalist reported a particular incident, before disseminating it, before they publish, they are into this kind of work, for example. So likewise, the third one, أن ينظر في رواته وطريقة تقليدهم له. You have to look to the reporters. Who are the reporters, and how do they report that incident or that hadith, for example. فإذا تمت فيه شروط الصحة حكم بصحته. When all the requirement of authenticity is confirmed in that narration, then it can be ruled out as an authentic narration. I hope you get this point. So what Uthaymin is trying to mention here, suppose for example you did not see it in the authentic publications, it doesn't mean that it is not authentic. You never heard it from a non-authentic or erudite scholar. Like for example, if you said, that's why even today, if you said Shaykh al-Islam said this, or you said or for example Ibn al-Qayyim, for example, or Imam al-Zahabi, al-Hafiz al-Zahabi, or for example al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar, or for example you mention one of the ulama of this time, for example one of the competent alim of this time. You said, he said, or for example you said al-Muhaddith. You said you find it from the statement of al-Muhaddith in Silsilat al-Hadith Sahiha. Oh, Uthaymin said this. Oh, Ibn Baz says this. Oh, Fawzan. Oh, Bayd al-Jabiri, for example. Oh, Suhaimi, for example. Oh, Muhammad bin Aman al-Jami. You see, these are the reliable ulama. If you mention a statement, like I'm just giving an example, just ulama of recent. One of them that I mentioned is still alive, for example. You see, he's a reliable person. When he quoted a statement, you can rely on his statement because you know he is competent in that field. He's a specialized person. Any matter that is related to that, you can consult him in that. But if a statement comes from a person from another planet or from another nook and cranny from the globe, for example, you cannot just take it as a valid one because you don't have a relation with the field. So you have to verify. You have to follow some of the processes. So suppose you never heard it from any of the scholars or any of the researchers or student of knowledge. You can also go further to see how does it come, the chain of the transmission. Who narrated that? Who says that? And if you see that this narration fulfill all the requirement of validity, you can consider it as a valid. You can consider it as authentic or satisfactory narration. And that's the work that Muhaddis did in some of the recent time. You would see a kind of hadith that some of the Nuqad even, they said it is da'if. But after thorough evaluation of some of the ulama recited like Muhaddith in the field of hadith, you would see that he says, or he ruled out that this is da'if or authentic. And that's why you see some of the hadith in the silsilah hadith al-da'ifa, they are mentioned by some of the publishers or some of the writers or some of the ulama in their books as authentic, of which after thorough evaluation you would see that yes, indeed, was as how he said, that's how it is. And you would see some of the hadith by some of the righteous predecessors, they termed it as a weak one, a weak narration. But you would find that it is still hadith sahih. Even to silsilah al-hadith sahih, like for me, for example, I do not like, yes, I rely, but sometimes I have to also practice to check the isnad, to check the matan, to go through this kind of protocols in order to verify, is that what the Muhaddis said? Is that right or wrong? And I would say it is right. So that's it. There is need for verification. Suppose you just tell me something happened in your area, or in your locality, or in your country, or something like that. I will not just react to it. I have to follow this kind of protocols to confirm whether it is authentic or not, and when, and where, and why does it happen, or why did he mention that? Even to the ayat, we have asbab al-nuzul, we have al-nasikh wal-mansukh, we have madniya and makkiyah. And likewise, in the hadith, you have to first check this kind of chain of the transmission, the matan, the rijal, all this rutbah, the tariq al-naql, the riwayah and the dirayah matters. Because any incident, any narration can create judgment, whether that judgment would be adequate or inadequate, whether it would be a kind of authentic or a flimsy one to some of the people, or it would be admirable to some of the people. It would be a kind of admiring incident, whether it would be adequate or inadequate. So that's how it is. Because any report that you would report, any statement that you would utter, can create reaction, can trigger feeling and emotions. It can be adequate to someone, and it can be inadequate to someone. But what matters is validity. What matters is the facts. Suppose you narrated something, you reported a fairy tale. If I know it is fairy tale, I will not react. It cannot interfere with my emotions, for example. If I know it is a fact, and I know it is the valid information, so by this I would be able to react in a proper way. It can affect my emotions. So that's the reason why mass communication, public addressing, journalism is very important field. Likewise, the telecommunications. And that's why there is need for competent individuals in those fields. Otherwise, there would be a lot of pattern And that's the reason why you would see this is maintained by many of the journalists, many of the channels, news channels, many newspapers, many journals, they maintain this. Allah musta'an. So these are some of the points that you should know. Scholarly process is not like a kind of open gate or open door that everyone can go into it without learning. If you are learned, then it will be pleasant for you. But if you are not learned, it will be unpleasant for you, and you would be asking, why is it that? Why does it happen in such a way? Why this? Why that? Because you are not learned. But if you learn, you study well, you are competent enough, then it would be a pleasant process, pleasant path for you. And that's why you see today, we know it can happen, for example, in some of the reasonable issues. A particular reporter would report something and people would attack him, or they would refute him, they would criticize him. It can happen. But what matters is, did he report that which is the fact? Whatsoever he says is true or not? If you report something that is truthful, something that is valid, whatsoever would be the consequence or result for that, it is okay. But if you mention a fairy tale and you receive a kind of evil consequence, then don't blame anyone, but blame yourself. Allahu musta'an. So these are the basic principles to look while verifying information in the field of hadith, and likewise it is applicable to our daily life, for example, in other aspects also. So I think due to the time limitation, we are to stop in the next point, وَالصَّحِيحُ لِغَيْرِهِ, the one that is authentic due to Allah. So one of the class of al-ahad based on the merit, one of the class of hadith based on merit is the one that is authentic due to another report, due to other report. Maybe a particular reporter reported that, but I know that particular reporter has personalities issues, behavioral issues, for example, or he has some of the deficiency. Although he is competent, he has the qualification, he is a licensed person, but because I know some of the deficiencies in his report or in his personality, when another person reported the same information, the same narration, and that particular person that reported, he is a competent person, full of reputations, then I would consider that report that came to me first as authentic due to the report of other reporter. I hope this point is clear. So الحسن الصحيح لغيره الحسن لذاته. Normally الصحيح لغيره is الحسن لذاته. It is satisfactory in its normality. In normal basis, it is الحسن لذاته. That is الحسن. الحسن لذاته. إذا تعددت طرقه, when its channels, the channel of the report multiplies, so then it would be uplifted to a level of that is, instead of al-hasan li-zatihi, hasan li-zatihi to sahih li-ghayrihi. So if the narration is classified as satisfactory one, and other report come after that, multiple reports with the same information, the same narration, so that can be uplifted to a kind of authentic report, a kind of authentic narration. It will be termed as authentic narration, but due to other report or due to other reporters. مثاله, example of it, Hadith Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhuma. The Hadith narrated by Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, may Allah be pleased with both of them, meaning him and his father, Abdullah ibn Amr and Amr ibn al-As, excluding their grandfather, because As ibn Wa'il was a kind of person that has harmed Rasulullah alayhi wasallam, and he rejected the faith. So Abdullah ibn Amr was among the erudite reporters during the lifetime of the Rasulullah alayhi wasallam. He was a Sahabi, and his father also, Amr ibn al-As, was a Sahabi. So may the Almighty be pleased with them. And indeed also the Almighty was pleased with them according to, that is authentic hadith, according to ayat from the Quran. I'm not going to open this chapter, but when we are going to give a kind of summary related to the personalities, we have to mention their credits, for example. So likewise, like the hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr, أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أمره أن يجهز جيشا Now Rasulullah عليه وسلم commanded him أن يجهز جيشا, to prepare a kind of troop or expedition. But Rasulullah عليه وسلم asked him to assemble a precaution for an expedition. فنفدت الإبلة, and the camels get finished. The camels finished up. He disseminated the camels to the riders for that expedition. But the camels were not enough. So we know in normal circumstances, if a kind of journey is a long journey, or the expedition is a long one, it's a high distance journey, so you have to utilize the most organized vehicle, the most accurate vehicle, and the highest vehicle during the time of the Sahaba, which is utilized in, that is for transportation, the medium of transportation, the most highest one is the camel. When you are going for a long journey, usually during that time they utilize camel for long journey, like the Tabuk, the Ghazwat Tabuk. Many of them were on camels because it is a long journey, and that journey requires some precaution because it is during summer, for example. So that's why camels were considered in that expedition. So as for today, the highest, like for example, the most highest medium of transportation we have for a long journey is like through air, or for example, that is like for example through inland or on land. On land, like for example the car or the cars, for example, automobile vehicles, or on train, for example. On air, you take the aeroplane. If you have private jet, you can go with it. For example, it is your own wish. So likewise, at that time, those that were able to get the camels, they have not any problem. But there are other people that they did not have the medium of transportation, and the journey was a long journey, so they requires that, and they are not capable. They don't have the means to purchase or to buy the vehicles, to buy the medium of transportation, to buy camels. فنفد الإبل, the camels get finished. فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, and the Prophet mercy of Allah be upon him said, he said, ابتع علينا إبلا بكلائس من كلائس الصدقة, go and purchase for us some other camels in exchange with the small camels. which are sourced from sadaqah, from charity. Normally, whenever the charity was given, if the charity is given of the resources, for example, if it is of mineral resources or money, for example, or ad-dirahim wa dirham, it can be stored in the Bayt al-Mal. When the charity or the sadaqah or the zakat is given of the animals cannot be kept in the Bayt al-Mal, otherwise they would die. So the Rasulullah decided a kind of rearing house or at the outskirts of the city of Medina, where there would be shepherds who rear those kind of animals, who take care of the animals. So that's the way they keep the animals in the gardens, in the farms, and the outskirts of the cities, the forests and the bushes nearby. So among the charity that was already given, there are some of the camels that are young camels. They are not adult, they are not good enough to be utilized in a long journey. So the Rasulullah gave him a kind of recommendation: go and purchase giant camels with these small camels. So now the Rasulullah is trying to send him to a business, to a kind of business transaction. So definitely, but we are going to understand that Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As, he is so intelligent in business. He's a person with intellectual intelligence in terms of marketing and business. So he was selected for that assignment, and he went further. And the Rasulullah said to him, as how it was reported, the Rasulullah said, go and purchase giant camels with by these small camels. فكان يأخذ البئير بالبئيرين والثلاثة. He used to take a giant camel in exchange with 2 of the small camels, or even 3. Meaning he gave 2 camels to get 1, or 3 camels to get this. What can we understand in marketing? There is no problem with exchange, for example, and this is a kind of chapter that is related to mortgage, the rulings of mortgage. This hadith is applicable in that issues and other issues related to this kind of matters that are related to transactions. So when you give your normal currency in order to get the sterling pounds, or to get the dollars, or to get the naira or rupees or yens, anyone, if the values differs, no problem with that. It is halal. It doesn't mean that it is haram, because in this hadith we get to realize Abdullah ibn Amr was assigned to by the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a kind of business transaction. He buy a giant camel by giving 2 small camels, or 3 small camels, young camels. فقد رواه أحمد من طريق محمد بن إسحاق. This hadith was narrated by Imam Ahmad in his Musnad from the chain of the transmission of Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Who is Muhammad ibn Ishaq? Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasar ibn Khiyar. Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasar ibn Khiyar was among the erudite narrators and the first predecessors. He has one of the popular publications, one of the popular book, which is known as As-Sirah ibn Ishaq. So this hadith was reported by Imam Ahmad from who is Ibn Ishaq? What is his competency? What is his reputation? He is a thiqah, but being him Saduq, as how some of the past predecessors consider him to be, he is not adlun tam al-dabt. Indeed, he is al-adl, and he is al-dabt according to some of the erudite scholars of his time, and the erudite scholars that come after him. But some of the nuqad, they credited him with a lower level credits. There is even one of the popular one that defamed Ibn Ishaq. Allah musta'an. I think I should mention that particular person or that particular personality. Imam Malik once stated, he was asked about Ibn Ishaq. He says, Ibn Ishaq كان أحد من الدجاجلة. In one of the narration, كان دجال من الدجاجلة. In one of the narration, دجال من الدجاجلة. He is a concorder from the concorders. Meaning, it's a kind of defamation, because Imam Malik considers him as a liar. But is that the case? No. Imam Malik rahimahullah was known with a kind of utterances against some of the ulama of his time, whom they are authentic people, they are competent people, but according to his ijtihad, he defamed them. He said, so person is a liar, so person is not a person to take knowledge from, so person is a wrong person, so person is a weak. But if you review the issue, some of the ulama of his time, they have corrected Imam Malik on that. They have credited some of the individuals. So this statement of Malik to Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad ibn Ishaq, cannot be considered just. But it worked. Why do they reported that? As far as this statement of Imam Malik was reported, so it can affect the personality of Ibn Ishaq, because the one that criticized him was also among the Nuqad. He was a great person, Imam Malik bin Anas. Like Shafi'i, to criticize person, to say he is Dajjal, he is a liar. So that can affect, and that's the reason you should know. Criticism is welcome. Criticism, no problem with it to a certain extent. But it can affect personalities. You should know this. Imam Malik also said, كلنا راد ومردود عليه إلا صاحب هذا القبر فأشار بيده إلى قبر الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. All of us are criticizing, and all of us can be criticized except the person of this grave. He pointed towards the grave of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So suppose today you come across a particular alim, a particular scholar, he criticizes another scholar. It doesn't mean that that particular person is out of the scholarship or the scholarly process due to that criticism. But that criticism can affect his personality, either his information. Allah musta'an. So since that Imam Malik, as a Nuqad, criticized, he mentioned a kind of commentary, which is a kind of negative commentary against Muhammad ibn Ishaq. And if you compare Imam Malik and Ibn Ishaq, you will see the level is not the same. So it can affect, I mean in the field of hadith, even though Muhammad ibn Ishaq was a kind of competent person, but why does it come like this? So you see, it's a kind of defect in his personality, but still he is a competent person and he has reputations. Beside this, Uqwat ibn Hisham, he says that when he was asked about Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasar, he made a commentary on him. He says, I don't have any problem with that particular person. He don't have any problem, but he narrated a narration from my wife. He narrated a narration from my wife, and I don't think he knew her. He never knew her. How can he mention a riwayah, a narration that he got an information from my wife? How? He never knew her. So if a person mentioned this kind of statement, look, that is, a layman can say, yeah, so meaning Muhammad ibn Ishaq is a liar, because he mentioned something that is not the fact. He narrated a riwayah from Fatima bint al-Munzir. Yes, that is the wife of Hisham bin Urwa, Fatima bint al-Munzir. So Hisham bin Urwa said that that particular person, Muhammad bin Ishaq, he has no any problem. But the only thing is that he narrated a riwayah from my wife. How? He never knew her. Then if you go back to some of the statement in the history, Abdullah ibn Ahmad bin Hanbal, the son of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. In this case, the case of Muhammad bin Ishaq, he stated that it might be that he visited his house, and she gave him the permission. He asked her about the information, about knowledge, and she taught him something. And you see, this can happen. So by the statement of Abdullah ibn Ahmad, we know that case of Urwa ibn Hisham is not accepted. So that's why you need to listen. If you just judge someone, or particular personality, or politician, or a scholar, or alim, by just a report of a particular person, without listening from other sources, so you can maybe defame that particular person unjustly. So you do injustice, but that injustice will not affect you if you do it based on the knowledge that you have, or the knowledge that came from you, and neither it will harm that personality. So also Urwa ibn Hisham said this. It will not affect his competency, but still it will affect his reputations. Do you get it? Muhammad bin Ishaq might be a person with highest qualifications. So qualification can be regard and competency. But if you are talking about reputations, it's totally different with competency. Although both are related in one way or the other. So that saying of Urwa ibn Hisham can affect his reputation. The saying of Imam Malik can affect the reputation of Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Although the narration that Imam Ahmad narrated of this hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As was not directly from Muhammad ibn Hisham, because there is a scholar, that is the teacher of Imam Ahmad was a student to Muhammad ibn Ishaq. Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasar ibn Khiyar. So, but the reason why Usaymin mentioned that it was reported by narrated by Imam Ahmad from the chain of Muhammad ibn Ishaq, because Muhammad ibn Ishaq was a known personality in terms of recitation. He was a kind of accredited person. So since that the narration of Imam Ahmad is linked to the riwayah of Muhammad ibn Ishaq, there is no problem with such narration, meaning it is valid. But can it be considered as authentic? No. Unless by thorough evaluation. For Muhammad ibn Ishaq, him alone cannot make a narration to be authentic one. But this can be authentic due to another narration, of which I think Muhammad bin Salih al-Uthaymin has mentioned further. He said, ورواه البيهقي من طريق عمرو بن شعيب. Now البيهقي in his Sunan al-Kubra or Sunan al-Kabir, he narrated this, but from the pathway of Amr ibn Shu'ayb. And Amr ibn Shu'ayb also is a credited person. So that's the reason why there are other narrations with the same information, the same matter. So that hadith is an example of Sahih al-Ghayrihi. Allah al-Musta'an. So that's one of the issue. وَكُلُّ وَاحِدٌ مِنَ الطَّرِيقَيْنِ, to each and every pathway. وَكُلُّ وَاحِدٍ, to each مِنَ الطَّرِيقَيْنِ, of the ways, of the pathways, of the chain of the transmission, بِانْفِرَادِهِ, separately, حَسَنٌ, it is a kind of satisfactory one. Muhammad ibn Ishaq is a satisfactory person, no problem with him. Likewise, Amr ibn Shu'ayb, he is a satisfactory person. So there is no problem with that hadith if it is considered as صحيح لغيره. وكل واحد من الطريقين بانفراده حسن فبمجموعهما, with both of them, if you align them together, يصير الحديث صحيحا لغيره, the hadith will become صحيح لغيره. So this is the result. But for that single riwayah of Muhammad ibn Ishaq ibn Yasar ibn Khiyar shall not fulfill the merit of authenticity. But after thorough evaluation, it was found that there are other narrations, or there is another pathway that came from Amr ibn Hisham, which was narrated by Imam al-Bayhaqi, with the same content, the same matter. So this riwayah of this hadith, it is Sahih al-Ghayrihi, that is considered as Sahih al-Ghayrihi. It becomes Sahih al-Ghayrihi. وإنما سمي صحيحا لغيره, the reason why it is named, or it is termed, or it is called as صحيح لغيره, authentic due to other, لأنه لو نظر إلى كل طريق, suppose if you are to look to each of the ways, each of the pathways, if you look to the entire pathways, to all of the ways, بانفراد, separately لم يبلغ رتبة الصحة, it will not reach the level of authenticity. فلما نظر إلى مجموعهما, when it is observed, when all of them, when both of the pathways were observed, قوي حتى بلغها, the hadith, the narration, the matin, the hadith gets strengthened up to the extent that it reaches to a level of authenticity. Being the narration from Ibn Ishaq is a satisfactory person, his narration is a satisfactory one. But if other people reported that, then that narration can reach a level of authentic. So likewise, I can give example of some of the journalists or news channels, of which if they report something, I would consider it satisfactory. I'm okay with their contents, I'm okay with their information. Like also YouTubers of today, for example, or some of the ulama, if they mention something, I don't have problem with that. I'm satisfied with their information. But I cannot just consider that as the most authentic ruling, or authentic saying, or authentic report, unless if I see it from other mashayikh, other news channels, other reporters, other journalists, for example. So I think this point is clear. By this that is part of our discussion. We are going to stop here. In the next discussion, in our next session, we are going to proceed with the next class, which is al-hasanu li zatihi, followed by al-hasanu li ghayrihi and da'if. So whatsoever we have discussed in this session, we ask the Almighty to reward us in it, and whatsoever that come, that is of shortcomings or short statements, we ask the Almighty to erase that from our deeds. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.